It's going to be ironic if Twitter Spaces just starts working flawlessly.
Like a last desperate plea to keep us.
You know who always did this to me? Providence. So you and I both went to school in Providence, Rhode Island. And Providence could see through time and space and knew when I was going to the airport to leave Providence. And it was then and only then that, the most beautiful days I've ever seen in Providence were when I was on the way to the airport. I'm like, damn it, Providence, you've done it again.
It's like the opposite of the Stephen O'Grady effect.
It is absolutely the opposite of the Stephen O'Grady effect. Yeah, I was, people should, I was incentivized everyone in Providence should have been incentivized for me to leave Providence. So I'm glad that I feel, just knowing what has happened inside of Twitter, I am waiting for this whole thing to collapse at any given second. And I mean like technically collapse. I mean like
totally. Like I saw this Twitter thread where it was like I guess all weekend the notification counts have been busted. Have you noticed this?
Yeah, I had heard that, and I'm looking for. Hold on, I'm going to send Kris an invite. Yeah, I've heard that.
And then you got the boss making claims about RPCs and like getting into discussions with engineers like in public about technical details. It's
that was particularly bonkers. The whole like apologizing for the number of
RPCs
of RPCs. It's like, are you going to? Because you and I both shared someone who we decided a micromanager was unacceptably fine-grained to describe him, and I think we ended up describing him as either a nano manager, a pico manager, or a femto manager, depending on what his disposition was. But do you remember when this is a VP who was like on us about the instruction sequence you were using for these races? Remember this?
Yes, I do.
I remember both of us being like, well, that answers that question. Like, Mark will attempt to manage to the instruction level. He actually, there is actually no bounds which he will not sink.
This is like a 4-byte comment that we are down to. Like that level of detail. Like these 4 particular bytes.
He is managed to the byte level. And hold on, let me just DM. I don't know. Unfortunately, one of the challenges of platform collapse is like I don't know which platform to DM people on. Like, are we? We're definitely living. We're eyewitnesses to history for sure. So give me just a second.
Yeah. It does feel like this website is just hanging on by a thread. It also just lunacy to think like if you fire all the engineers and the people keeping things up, that somehow Twitter would continue to exist without hiccups. Just astounding.
Yeah, and we are kind of doing a weird experiment of like what does happen if you actually get rid of all of, say, the SREs. Like, how does the system collapse exactly?
I think also incentivized by asking folks to go on a death march to prove their worth, and then immediately ending the thing that they death marched for with like the blue check mark, $8 subscription or whatever. Pretty astounding.
And I mean, I'm loath to kind of turn this into something broader and more strategic, but if you wanted to deliberately demoralize people, like that's actually the goal. That's actually like a pretty effective way to demoralize people.
Yeah. Totally. And on all of this, like, would defy imagination in Silicon Valley, right? The HBO writers would say, guys,
no, come on. Yeah. This is just lazy writing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, I'm waiting for anything again, kind of structurally to happen. And I know that we definitely need to find a new home. Actually, Adam, do you want to give maybe a quick update while we're waiting for Kris on the search for new social audio space? Because I think it's not going great. But
was this on me?
No, it's on you. Sorry.
I'm kidding. So we're looking for new social audio space. Folks have made some good suggestions. Discord seems promising. Twitch seems credible. I did evaluate one that sort of had a 1997 AWT kind of UI feel to it. But I think, I don't know, I haven't bounced this off you, Brian, so let's do it live. I think we should find like 3 or 4 that we're willing to kick the tires on and like maybe schedule
Yeah.
half an hour or something on each of them, just to
Yes.
give it, an earnest evaluation. And maybe we cut it off early if we're like, nope, Discord's good enough or whatever it is. Then maybe we say we don't need to evaluate the rest. But throw a few in the pile and invite anyone who wants to yammer with us. Maybe we do it as an AMA or something.
Yeah, that'd be great. And then we can kind of test run various features and so on. No, I think that'd be great. I think so. Some of the things that we're looking for, which Adam, to us, this feels like really natural, but it seems like there's just not something that hits the sweet spot. So we need the ability to have lots of people listen simultaneously. Especially whenever Kelsey Hightower joins, we always have like 1,000 people pour in. So we definitely need to have the ability to have like thousands, on the order of thousands. We need the ability to have speakers. I think, Adam, one of the things that you and I really like is the ability for us to dynamically have speakers join us.
Yeah, absolutely. And in part because it's great when people show up. Also in part because we're bad at planning.
Right. Yes, I think both of these things, though, actually.
That's the yin and the yang. Yeah.
It is actually both of these things. It's not merely that we're bad at planning.
No, absolutely. That is just a factor.
Right. And I think it's also that we like that serendipity of it. And I feel like we've had some of the most valuable contributions from folks that have that you and I don't personally know, and they introduce themselves. And if people haven't, please go back. Talk about last week's space. Vivid example of this, where one of the things that we were talking about in particular with the way these layoffs were mishandled at Twitter was the effect on those that are in the U.S. on a visa, and a bunch of immigrants who'd been in the U.S. for various lengths of time. Some were sharing their experiences, and some we knew and some we didn't. And I thought it was really meaningful.
Yeah, it was great. And I think shame on me and my own privilege that I did not see the depth of that discussion coming. And I was really appreciative of the folks who had joined us. Yeah,
well, and that's honestly like I feel had I not married an immigrant, I don't know people realize how. Anyway, that was great to get people sharing their stories. So we really like that aspect of it. We like that and so Adam, this is a good kind of segue into what we want to get to today and talking about Mastodon and the Fediverse and get Kris talking here about her experiences with hackaderm. So I've been kind of doing a mental inventory of what has been good about Twitter and what has been not so good about Twitter and what is like both good and not so good about Twitter. So I don't know if you got kind of specific thoughts of things that you like what are the ways in which Twitter has most uplifted your life?
I think that when I have had these serendipitous conversations, in particular with people I really admire and respect, I'll give you an example that comes to top of mind. There's this guy, Andy Anatko, who's a tech writer, has been a tech writer for a very long time because I used to read his articles in the Mac User magazine in the 90s and would love this guy, right? When I was 12 or 13 or whatever, was super into this guy. I had written this article that got picked up by ours about ZFS and Mac OS. And I engaged with him on Twitter about how much he loved this article, and it just warmed my heart. It was a delightful interaction.
Okay, so this is, and I think this is what the real power of Twitter, where you are interacting with someone that you follow but doesn't necessarily follow you.
Yeah.
This is like when have you listened to any Loyal Corner? By the way, have we talked about Loyal Corner?
Yeah, I don't know that we've talked about it on the show, but we've definitely talked about it.
Okay, I definitely have talked to you about Loyal Carter, hip hop artist, unbelievable artist, and he liked one of my replies to his tweets. Oh God, I was just like, oh man, this is celebrity, baby.
Just rub it all over yourself.
Rub it all over. But it just it was a good reminder of that feeling of wow, that feels good. It feels good. I've got someone whose work I have admired from afar, who's engaging with me. And that feels good. And, I know we've been able to return that favor a bunch in our careers. So that's okay. Good. Yeah. I like that one. That's a good one in the positive vibes. On the
other side of the ledger,
let's go to the other side of the ledger.
And this may be sort of my naive initial introduction to Mastodon, that I feel like Twitter, as it evolved, kind of changed my behavior in ways that I didn't appreciate, and until getting back to Mastodon, where there was I think it started to encourage this kind of strive for virality.
Yes.
And I think one of the big changes is when likes became part of the algorithm and something that it would share. And so the internal calculus of when you like something changed, and the internal calculus of kind of how you phrase things to play into that algorithm kind of changed. And I think probably, from my perspective, not for the better, not for deeper conversations, but for ones that were more pithy and more appealing and often like dunking on folks.
Yes.
And that was deliberate, right? Like, because that's fun and that drives engagement, and that's keeps eyeballs on it. And I think it was very effective. But I'm not sure I liked it, especially when I look at the cumulative effects.
Totally. And I think that, this is where Twitter would piss me off, and I would say us off. And there's a degree to which we liked it. I came back for it. This is not the better angels of my nature. And, so I think like the right at the cross section of this, and this is again a good segue to get into like Mastodon and how it's different. So Mastodon does not have quote tweets. And what's your take on that, Adam?
Yeah, it seems like a good way to prevent me from dunking on people, right?
It really is, and it's like there's a great piece by and I shut the name in front of me, but the CEO of Mastodon.social, I guess, explaining that this is like a deliberate decision, and it's like really interesting because it does kind of cool it off, and the discussions are being much better. So I think that, Nova, you're here. I want to get you in here because we are you've been maybe you could describe your own journey with Mastodon, because you've been really helping get our tribe on Mastodon with hackaderm.io.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Is this?
It is on.
Yes,
you are on. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you said something. I was like trying to jump in. It was taking a lot for me to like chew on my tongue here and not opine.
No, opine, please. Yeah, go for it.
But yeah, so like let me answer your most recent question. How did we get on Mastodon? So I run a Twitch stream, and we have been like kind of dealing with the whole like Twitter like fiasco anyway for the past few months. And one of the things we do on Twitch is we like try out new software and we try out new things and we kind of build stuff in my home lab. So like our very small, like streamers only little group of hackers, decided to set up a Mastodon server, I think in April of this year. And well, like, fast forward, and now, a substantial part of the internet is moving on to these servers that sit behind me on my Twitch channel. And we're like, oh my gosh, we actually have production infrastructure now. So that's kind of like how the story of hackaderm came to be.
That is awesome. So I almost like, and when you, because obviously in April, this clearly corresponds to Musk saying that he's going to buy Twitter. Are you thinking like this may be the lifeboat we all need to crawl into? Or are you just like, this is something I kind of want to experiment with?
I think both, right? Like, I think one of the things I remind myself about the internet is like any large like change has always kind of been uncomfortable and unexpected. And like looking back to like IRC and email and like, joining Facebook, even like when I was in college, right? Like it was controversial. It was hard. It was different. It was weird. I hated it at first. Even Docker. Right?
Yeah.
The first time I ran a Docker container, I was pissed. Can I swear here? But I was pissed off,
yes.
Right? It sucked. I fucking hated it, right? I wanted to SSH into it. It was horrible. It stopped in the middle of running it, and then like it would be gone forever, and I just wanted my text file back. And like I remind myself of all of this, and I say like maybe this is just like a new paradigm that like I'm just not like used to, and I haven't taken it into like my own way of dealing with the internet, right? Like, because like whether or not I want to admit it, like my well-being and my mental health is way more coupled to the internet than it should be.
I think you speak on behalf of all of us here.
Yeah.
Totally. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. I think you've nailed a bunch of really important points. One of which being that like these transitions often are uncomfortable to the point that people kind of draw the wrong inference of this. Like, oh, if my technology is uncomfortable, it must be the next revolution. It's like, no, that's not the way it works. Just because your technology is hard to use doesn't make it the next kind of thing where we are going. But it's often true that when you've got people pouring into something for good and external reasons, there are a lot of things that need to be improved. And
I was gonna say, like, I think it's improvement, and I think you hit the nail on the head with like, just because your technology is new or different or sucks or people don't like it doesn't mean it's going to be big. I think timing is what we have here.
Oh yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like, and we talk about this all the time in the VC circles. It's like you have to have a good product and you also have to time the market right. But like this whole thing is just timed perfectly. Like with the implosion of Twitter, plus the like economic state of the world and the fact that our economy is dipping, plus the fact that like a whole new generation of technologists are like moving into the scene for the first time in their lives, and they have a completely different relationship with the economy than like folks like we did. Like this whole thing is just timed perfectly, in my opinion.
Totally, and I loved mentioning that rising generation of technologists, because by the way, that rising generation of technologists did not grow up on Twitter. They are not like they grew up in actually a much more fragmented world rather, where speaking on watching my own kids, right, who are on Snap for this, they're on Twitter for things that look more. My kids treat Twitter the way I treat LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Well, on timing, I'd say I don't think the timing is like the thing, because GNU Social has been there for 10 years. And there are still instances of GNU Social, and the protocol evolved essentially from what GNU Social was talking. I think it's the thing that it was here when the Twitter imploded.
Well, I think that's definitely right, but I do think that you needed this timing element, and I actually think I joined Mastodon on when a lot of people seem to join it on April 2nd, 2017. I've even tried to go back through. I'm like, what happened on April 2nd on Twitter? And I think it must have just been that Mastodon announced itself. Because I noticed that a bunch of people joined that same time, and I did, and I think Kris, you probably did the same thing, where you hopped on there. Because were you on Mastodon before April of this year?
No, I was not. We
you were
set
not.
up our
okay.
own server.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was like I think it was like me and my partner Q. Like we were like users 1 and 2 of Hackaderm, and that was our intro to the Fediverse, right? Like
okay, so
like
you had not been on the Fediverse at all prior to that.
No.
Interesting. Okay, so then could you actually let's just get this out of the way, because you run your own instance, which has been terrific. And I think a lot of people have a first question of like, wait a minute, what is this thing? What does federated mean? What does it mean to have an instance? So could you describe a little bit about what it means?
Yeah, okay, so this is awesome. So I talk about this all the time, and this is really the thing that got me like most excited about Mastodon in general. So like small amount of context, I work at GitHub. I am a large distributed systems expert. I've been building large production platforms for the past 10 years. And this whole concept of like federated technologies is something that has been on my radar for the past half decade or so. And like we see this with Kubernetes, and we see this with like how people manage auth and identity. And this concept in general of like having a lot of small pockets of infrastructure that then like communicate between each other and build more of like a mesh topology is actually a much more resilient and much more sustainable architecture when you start dealing with these like large global systems. And like Mastodon takes that and applies like the social media element to it. And basically like your Mastodon instance is your little neighborhood and your portal into the world. And it works a lot like email, right? Like you have a fully qualified name, just like you do with email, and your neighborhood has like, it's a unique experience. It's unique to the folks that are on your little neighborhood, and that you completely have the keys to the kingdom there, right? Like you just run the open source software, but you define your own moderation policies and your own privacy policy. And like, I could go on now and shut it down or kick everybody off, or like, let only my friends join, or pretty much do whatever I wanted to. And it gives you a lot of control and freedom to like build your own little internet community. The beauty of it though is you can then federate and talk to anybody else in the Fediverse. So it's just like email. There's only one universe, but you have your own little like pocket of data in the corner of it. It's really, really exciting.
Well, and so there are a lot of things that I like about that. And actually, I should say first, when we did our immediate post Elon Musk Twitter episode, the Thursday he took over, and we had Charity on, and just kind of a random assortment. And I had said that, like, defederation is actually not something that I want. I think what I want is a single source in a product. Having been on Mastodon in the 2 weeks since, I really love it, actually. Snow, to your point. And I love, and I think that you kind of were alluding to this, but the fact that there's a human being or a collection of human beings running this instance gives it a great community feel that you don't get on these larger social networks. And I think I mean, I'd love to get your take on this. Do you think it makes people feel a greater sense of responsibility to know the human beings at the other end of that are admins on their instance?
I think so. I think this whole thing is about accountability and responsibility, and it's like breaking down that facade between like the consumer and the service provider, right? Like, and I wrote a whole book on this about like, being hypercritical of late stage capitalism and like, the trauma that has caused an entire generation of people. But like, to summarize, like, I really think that we're bringing people up with this idea that like you don't deserve a hug unless you have a receipt to go along with it, right? Like it's like this very like it's this very transactional relationship that like we're bringing into our living rooms, we're bringing into like our children's lives, and in my opinion, this kind of breaks that down. Right? Like it's no longer this invisible service provider that is this faceless entity that you can go scream and yell at and criticize and like deal with all of this trauma around. Oh, it's a person. It's me. It's Kris Nova, right? And it's my community. It's github.com/hackaderm, right? Like it's a real place. And we see this with businesses. It's just the small business of Twitter, and I fucking love it. It's amazing.
It's like the social media walkability score. It's like the social media walkability score is like 100 at Hackaderm.
Kris, is there some analogy to be drawn between, say, like Comcast and your local ISP? Is that like sort of a reasonable way to start thinking about it?
I say Twitter is Walmart and Mastodon is like a local coffee shop.
Okay.
Yeah, right. Where it's like, and people know your name, and it's like, but this local coffee shop cannot possibly feed all of Sacramento. It's like, yeah, that's actually not the point, by the way. So
Right.
Well, in terms of how you feed Sacramento or whatever, can you talk a little bit, Kris, about the hardware and the logistics of running a Mastodon server? Just because, I see lots of them popping up now, and I don't know whether this is like a small AWS instance or a room full of colo, or how that scales with users, or that'd be fascinating to hear about.
Yeah, so I'm going to do a totally shameless plug here.
Yeah.
If y'all go to twitch.tv/KrisNova, you can see I'm actually live right now. You can actually see the server behind me
Nice.
live on Twitch, and you can see me talking to you all. But yeah, it runs, and I have a little half cabinet that sits in my basement, and it's got a couple of it's got one Dell R670 and 3 R630s that we call the Animaniacs, Yakko, Wacko, and Dot. And those all run on one single fiber optic connection that comes through my basement. I pulled the wire myself when we first bought the house like 2 months ago.
I gotta say, just hearing your machine names, I'm like, pets not cattle, baby. I love because I feel like that's something also that we have kind of lost in the elastic infrastructure. It's like you can still actually have infrastructural pets. That's actually a good thing. There's you can have dynamically provisioned, but still instances that you love.
Yeah, and I mean that's where we are, right? Like don't get me wrong. I'm all about large, dynamic, elastic infrastructure where we have tens of thousands of servers online, right? Like I work at GitHub. I've worked at Twilio. I've been working in Kubernetes for the past decade or 16, however long that is, since 2016. But like this is small, right? Like we're doing 500 gigabytes of traffic a day. And like we have, I think, 300 gigs of storage right now. Like most of our data is just traffic, and like we can load balance that across 3 nodes. And to be honest, like one of the things one of my colleagues at GitHub said was she was like, this is like the greatest experiment the internet has ever seen, because everybody who's experimenting right now has gone through this whole thing before. We all have like some battle scars, track records behind us. And so like I'm looking at this with like we have folks from Google who work on the infrastructure with me, and we have folks who work on the Rust programming language who work on Hackaderm's infrastructure, and we're trying new things. We're like talking about multicast again, right? And we're like talking about like how would we actually go and build a vertically scaled piece of infrastructure with a presence around the world with like our data that we want to preserve. And our conversations are less about like, do we have a bunch of dynamic servers, and more about like, which country do we put the data in, right? Like it's like very like it's a human thing again. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, God, there's a lot there that's really interesting. And actually, as you're describing it, I'm thinking like, is like almost an analog for the homebrew computing movement in the late 70s, where you had a bunch of people who were, who were building bigger machines by day, but then coming home and having fun making smaller machines at night. And there was a lot of value to it and a lot of experimentation that was coming out of that. There's a lot of value to people running their own Mastodon instances. I mean, surely you're going to have teenagers running their own instances and learning a lot about how to maintain infrastructure by doing that.
I mean, you can also
I can tell you
pay
that
for
there
someone
are
else to
many.
do it for you, right? There is Master.host and other like hosting companies that will spin up a Mastodon server on your behalf, and you pay them a monthly fee to be able to run that server, and therefore you still have infrastructure on your own domain, like you have Mastodon on your own domain, but you don't have to deal with the overhead of operating that. That's what Simon, who is a listener here, has done with his, although he did have some issues with the amount of capacity that was allocated to his particularly busy instance.
And so, but this is where they are handling some of the mechanics of running it, but you are still handling, in this case, Simon is still handling the kind of the human element that Kris is describing of like the actual the moderators of the instance.
Yeah, you're still the mod on the instance,
Yeah.
and you pay for the domain, and you set up the DNS to point it at your at the instance that they're hosting for you. This is just a hosting provider similar to like a WordPress hosting provider, but instead of spinning up WordPress, they're spinning up Mastodon for you. I think the other thing that's super interesting about this whole movement is the fact that it's backed by a standard. It's backed by the ActivityPub standard, and Mastodon is one implementation of that standard, but you could re-implement it in whatever language or set of technologies that you would like, so long as you conform to the standard, you can hook into the network. I think that's super interesting.
Yeah, and if you, I mean, I did see the kind of a rejuvenation of the old Stallman. What you were calling Mastodon, I actually call Mastodon/ActivityPub.
Oh my god!
Yeah.
Wow.
But it feels like there actually is something there in terms of the ability to implement different kinds of things on top of the underlying protocol. And Kris, that's something that you've seen experimentation with, or because I know you've had a lot of really interesting thoughts on the ways you want to extend what you've got and experiment with it.
I mean, so this is like yet another feather in the hat of why I'm so like stoked about Mastodon and the Fediverse is like you said it, or like the other speaker said, it's built on ActivityPub, which is an open protocol, right? Like ActivityPub is to Mastodon and the Fediverse, like SMTP is to email, right? Or Jabber or XMPP or any of these other IRC even, right? These other open protocols. So like one of the things that we're doing is we're trying to write a Rust implementation for ActivityPub right now. We're trying to set up a relay. So like this whole thing, there's so much potential here. There's so much we could do with our data. And like, it's, in my opinion, it's just a matter of time before we start seeing like startups hit the market with like, it's like half social media, half infrastructure, something defederated mom and pop shop style, like services that people can go buy. But one of the things we're trying to solve right now is what is called like a relay, which basically says that like the hackaderm timeline, which is like why a lot of people are coming to hackaderm, we can basically bounce that over to another server and they can like meld that in with their timeline. And all that is just like, it's just like a reverse proxy for ActivityPub. And like you could write that in any programming language you want. And when we started looking around, like we found one that was in Go originally in April, and that was the only one I could find. And already since then, there's been about 3 or 4 other ones pop up. So we're seeing like that like uptick in innovation and projects popping up on GitHub that like we saw with Kubernetes in like early 2017. It's really, really cool to watch it happen.
That is really cool. And so could you talk a little bit about the timeline, the kind of the local timeline versus one's own timeline? 'Cause that is a difference as one is coming from Twitter to Mastodon. That timeline.
The easiest way I could describe it is, and actually I'm going to do this on my stream live if y'all are watching on my stream. If you just go look at the logs, right? If you get on like your server, if you spin up a server and you go look at the logs, you can see like it's like an old Nginx log line for every time somebody like clicks favorite or retweets or reposts something, or like they go and follow someone. And in order for the server, like our server, to actually like display that in your browser, we have to download and cache all of that data. So like your timeline is just composed of that cache. So it's everybody who's using Mastodon, using hackaderm as their portal to the world, is actually like contributing to this like local cache that only hackadermians can see, and that's what we use to feed and populate your timeline.
That's really cool. And I do feel like this is one of these important differences, because people are, again, when you're coming to Mastodon looking for Twitter, you're going to be disappointed because it is different. And I think that for me personally, and Adam, I dare say for you as well, Kris, certainly for you, like those differences have been delightful, actually. So you don't want to, you want to kind of embrace some of these differences. And it does mean that like your instance, because people, the first question you ask is like, what is the importance of selecting an instance? And it is both not a life-altering decision, but also kind of an important decision. And do you have a way of kind of when people are asking how should they find an instance, how do you kind of counsel them? Looking at the logs here on your Twitch stream, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So what I was going to say was like when I first, this is another one of my weird analogies, but it'll go into answering your question. When I first started writing Rust coming over from Go, there's another streamer on Twitch named Togglebit who said something. He said, like, if you try to tell the Rust programming language what you want it to do, you're going to have a bad time. He was like, you have to let the language teach you how it wants to be written. And he was like, until you can get over that head game switch and stop trying to put your Rust files where you want them and stop trying to like do things the Go way and actually let the language show you, you're going to fight with it. And honestly, I feel the same thing about Mastodon. Like you have to kind of approach it with an open mind, and you have to see like it's not going to be a Twitter replacement, but like you said, Brian, like it will be delightful. And so when I'm like talking with folks who are like, which instance do I join? I'm like, you can join hackaderm if you agree with our values and our principles, but ultimately it's kind of low risk. Like you can join wherever you want, you can move around. And that's like the beauty of it, is like once you're in, you can like start your own instance and move to a bigger one if you like the timeline, or start your own instance and then like, try to relay with a bigger instance that you want to get more of their data from, or like move from one to the other. And so like I would say like just pick one and try it out, and then like if you don't like it, try another one. Like you'll know when you get it, you can always move around.
It's great advice because it's low risk, and for a lot of folks, it seems to be paralyzing, right? That this is the first question that they're presented with, without a lot of context for how to answer it, and something that I think we can all do more to help new folks figure out their answer.
Yeah, I love the low risk way of thinking about it. This is a low risk decision. It's not because it's also not a zero consequence decision, but it's low risk. And as Kris, you can move around, you can change. So that's great, a great way of phrasing it. I know we got a couple hands up. Linear Cannon, I'm glad you're here. I was thinking about you because you had joined that space immediately after Elon descended upon Twitter. And you had suggested Mastodon in that space, and I was just like, I hadn't thought about Mastodon. Now here we are, only 2.5 weeks later. So I'm glad you're here. What are your thoughts?
You'll need to give me a second. I just had someone message me for work.
Yeah, no worries. That's right. We'll come back to you. And Tranate, you got your hand up.
Hey all, can you hear me fine?
We can.
Great. So sorry I joined late. What I wanted to say that, like, for some of us in some other parts of the world, the choosing of an instance has become so critical. For example, 2 years ago when we had war, our whole country's upstream got shut down. But while people were not able to communicate with each other via telegrams and signals and Facebook, which is the mainstream here, all of us on our local Mastodon servers, we have, I think at this point, 4 Mastodon servers, each of them running on a separate ISP, and all of the ISPs are connected locally, internally in the country. So that has been our lifesaver during the war. I mean, a literal lifesaver in this case.
Yeah, right. Wow.
So we were able to communicate data. And a lot of the people also jumped ship to, I mean, everyone was on Telegram, obviously. Everyone also jumped ship on Jabber, which is like the federated version of, instant messaging. Unfortunately, Apple killed the client on macOS. But the concept of how the ability of running our own instances has literally been a lifesaver, and the communities here have been growing very well, especially in the younglings. I'm talking 16, 17-year-old people who are just running their own server in their own house, like me. All of our instances are not DigitalOcean hosted. We run it in our own houses. On old servers with even Unicode domains that we like. So in case of a shutdown from the government or from the upstreams, if that ever happens again, we can still keep communication internally and see what happens. And that has been, I mean, that's not for every person, but if you're in a country that something like that might happen, Mastodon is definitely, and Jabber with it as well, a literal lifesaver. Or democracy saver.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. Wow, that's amazing. And the ability to continue to communicate and know that you've got your own channel that you can. And then do you federate those Mastodons as well? Or use them strictly locally?
Yeah, no, they are all federated. They all have Unicode Armenian domains. Things like the term hacker in Armenian, but Unicoded. Luckily, we also helped, I think, one of the sysadmins of the servers work with Mastodon on the Unicode part as well. We also deployed other types of ActivityPub servers like Social Home and PixelFed. A lot of people like to do photography. So anything that we can see running ActivityPub. Even I personally run something called Write Freely, which is a blogging platform on top of ActivityPub. And now a lot of the bloggers in Armenia are using a WordPress plugin that turns WordPress to an ActivityPub server.
Wow.
Interesting.
Great.
Yeah. That's definitely interesting. And I think that also, I mean, one of the things that you're highlighting and trying to get, part of the reason that we wanted to have this space at this time, because I know we've had it often at 5 p.m. Pacific, which is not a convenient time at all in Europe. The rest of the world has been really ahead of the U.S. on this. And Kris, we're talking about this last week, because it was certainly my perception that while the U.S. kind of went all in on Twitter, folks outside were rightfully looking at other alternatives. So I think as many has happened many times before, I feel we owe a debt to those who went their own path quite a bit earlier, and now those of us who are coming into it later are really able to appreciate the value of that and all of the having all of your own facilities there in Trenik in Armenia for that has been. We are all able now to take advantage of it, which is great.
Yeah, Kris, I want to give you the heads up. I muted you because we were picking up a little bit of your keyboard. Sorry about that.
No worries. Actually, the folks in Twitch were like, Nova, mute yourself. You're being obnoxious.
And it was actually getting me on Twitter. Someone was like, hey, are those your cherry reds I'm hearing? Because that's awesome. Let's talk about your keyboard. I'm like, don't think those are actually mine. I think those are actually
cherry blues.
Cherry blues. There we go. Nice. All right. So Linear Cannon, are you back from your
Yep. So, that actually touched on something I wanted to say, which is the fact that, when it comes to, other ActivityPub stuff, there isn't just Mastodon. There is, in the same space, there's also Pleroma and Miski, which is what I use, that are implementing sort of the similar social media type of thing and often have slightly different features than Mastodon. But also there's the things like PeerTube, which is, streaming video or just video replacement for YouTube type stuff that is also on ActivityPub. There's PixelFed. PixelFed was mentioned, which I think is meant to be it's for photo sharing. It's for art. And then there's Gitty. Gitty is actually experimenting with using ActivityPub to federate Git GitHub type issues and things like that, and be able to have that across instances. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in that space beyond just Mastodon, and there's a lot of stuff that's usable already outside of there.
Okay, $1 million question: is there social audio?
Yeah, exactly.
Not yet.
That is not something I'm aware of. There should be
not
though.
yet.
Yeah, I'm hoping so, because I do think that like in the kind of the positive Twitter bucket, Twitter Spaces has been one of, if not the best features about Twitter for me, Adam, because you talk about all those things that you like.
And what's number 2?
So number 2 gets more complicated, I think, actually, where because was that an earnest question? Sorry.
No. I guess, I mean, for me, it's like I could not have told you what new features came to Twitter in the last, I don't know, 10 years.
You know what? I think that the new feature that came to Twitter that I really appreciated is how hard it is to actually maintain a network that has any civility whatsoever to it. And I think that there was a huge human toll that we didn't see to create something that was even vaguely usable, and that we really appreciated as the cracks have opened.
That's totally fair enough, and you're right that comment was kind of minimizing that effort. But I would say also that product features have sort of mostly been either not either something that I didn't really understand as part of my workflow, or something that seemed to go away pretty quickly, or often both. But agreed. How about this? Agreed. Twitter Spaces has been great and a great feature. Through acquisition.
Yes, I think so. Leah Culver and her team did come with their acquisition. But yeah, so I have loved Twitter Spaces because it allows for all those things that you initially talked about. That why do we? I mean, Kris, you talked about like why are we spending too much of our lives on the internet? It's because that human connection is actually really important, and I really love that about Twitter Spaces. So that's been in just your question about like, can we get hopefully open protocols are going to allow for the implementation of something in the Fediverse, because I think that it's important. I think we've seen the value of it, and I'm hoping that we will certainly find a replacement, because we can't stay here. But looking forward to that. So I want to get to some other things that I actually love about Mastodon and the Fediverse that are people coming from Twitter will quickly appreciate when you start using it. One is and Adam, you hit on this earlier, but the total absence of an algorithm. The fact that your timeline is like just your timeline. Your timeline is the people that you follow and the things that they say or boost, not the things that they like.
Yeah, and not the things that Twitter is trying to get you to engage with. The tweet from 17 hours ago that is so enticing that you can't look away.
Not the tweet from 17 hours ago. Not the. I mean, I tell you this, like Twitter kept putting Scott Adams tweets in my feed. It's like, what are you doing?
Well, hey, maybe they realized that like anger is a good motivator, right?
Well, no, that's it. Is that like, I think whether they were doing it like deliberately of like, hey, let's mastermind the way that we get people angry and riled up because they stay on the platform, or I think much more likely it happened like bacteria. It just kind of evolved, and our numbers are up and to the right. I mean, you see this Musk is like, our engagement numbers are off the roof. Like, yeah, you want to know why? I mean, a burning building will have a lot of people gathering around it to watch it burn. Like, that's not a business. A burning building is not a business.
That's exactly how I felt about that.
Right? Ridiculous. And so I think that one of these, and we hit it on earlier, but man, the quote tweet is like right there because my first thought is like, we will add the quote tweet will be added to Mastodon. And then you realize like, no, it's a deliberate decision to not have the quote tweet. And that was like a moment of like, I was like, the mirror was held up to me. And it's like, you, Brian, are the monster. You are. and I'm like, because I'm like, wait a minute. What do I use quote tweets for? I use quote tweets to be shitty. I mean, that's what it boils down to at some level.
Yeah, primarily. I think like sometimes we say like, try to emphasize or say even more this or whatever. But you're right. But by and large, it's sort of like punching up, subtweeting, for the most part.
Yeah, and then I wonder to what degree. I mean, I still like, as I've been thinking about this, I'm like, because you've said some things too that I'm like, I really want to like not just reply to that, but I want to kind of quote that. and it's kind of a yes and is not always shitty. So is there a way, maybe if they're mutuals, I don't know if there's a way to do, but there are no quits. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead,
So
Kris.
what I was going to say is number one, I have to opine on quote tweeting. I think that like in general, quote tweeting is net negative. It's like subtweeting. Like it's bad for everyone. It's bad for everyone. It's bad for you. It's bad for your health. It's bad for the other person. Nobody wins. It's just lose for everyone. I also think that like most of the time, to be candid, it's petty, right? Like
totally.
That's the word I would use for it. Is it's like we can be adults here and we can just actually engage with each other directly or not engage at all.
Brian, this is an intervention, just so you know.
No, it should be. I have asked for this intervention. No, I know. I agree. I agree, and it's sorry, Kris, go ahead.
Oh, go. And all I was going to say, and then I'll shut up. I promise. All I think that we're saying right now is we just have a feature request for Mastodon to get better at unfurling URLs. That's literally all I'm saying. Is like if we can just get it to the point where we can put whether it's a tweet or a toot or something into Mastodon, and then you just see it in your browser like a quote tweet, like we're done. That's it. This whole conversation's over.
Right.
Okay. And actually, Kris, I'm glad you mentioned the browser, because another thing that I love about Mastodon and the Fediverse, usable from the browser. No need. I mean, God, how much do you hate it? Slack and Reddit. I hope that there is a special place in hell for both of the people that insist on those things being seen in their apps. It's like, this experience is better on the app. Like, do you want to download the app right now? It's like, I definitely don't. Go away. And I love the fact, I don't know, Adam, if you use the...
No, absolutely. Yeah, use on mobile and use the app, and definitely like the Reddit like salesmanship in the browser is enraging. Like, I just don't use Reddit as a result.
It's terrible, and it's like, are you sure you want to use it on the browser? Like, are you absolutely certain about? Like, no, seriously. If you thought about all the ramifications right now of using it on the browser, because it doesn't seem like you have, and you're like,
I don't have my wallet with me. Stop. Right.
Stop. But I love the fact that it's usable on the web, on the browser. It's like you can actually use this thing. It's light. It's fast. I mean, it's really nice.
You don't have like thousands of RPC calls to load the homepage.
Well played.
Yeah.
Cross that one off your bingo card.
There we go. Looks like we've got a hand from Ignalotus.
On the other hand, even if it's built for the web, well, then your apps aren't as great, because the app situation for Mastodon is not that good, honestly.
Sure, and I mean, I know you've been on it, I think, a lot longer certainly than I have. I'm just contrasting it to the Twitter experience, where it's the app experience has not been great there. These apps are gigantic. They often crash. I mean, they've got a lot of problems with them.
But by the way, I've been using the PWA, I think that's what it's called, the PWA Progressive Web App version on iOS. Just, the share button and add to a home screen, and it's been perfect. I don't know if that's also doable on Android, but like that feature for me has been it's like a separate window of Safari on its own kind of thing. But that experience has been perfect. Just if anyone wants to do that.
Yeah, you can do that on Android too.
Yeah, you do it on Android too. I've been using both hackaderm and Mastodon.social on Android and on Chrome, and it's awesome. Moritz, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. For the quote tweet question, everyone said it's not gonna be added to Mastodon, but Mastodon isn't the standard, and Mastodon interoperates with other activity pub implementations. So you can already see the confusion with the content warning field in the standard that is defined as a subject line, and Mastodon uses it for a content warning, but it isn't in the standard like this. So we will see an interesting social experiment where the dominant server implementations will and front-end implementations will kind of make and break features and representations and what a certain thing means just by implementing it.
Okay, that's interesting. And you've actually, I'm glad we got to the subject, because Kris, I'd love to get your take on this. I know this has been a hot topic. about this issue of what I guess I didn't realize was the subject field in ActivityPub, but does come across a content warning in Mastodon, which people kind of culturally use to let people know, hey, this is a subject you may not be interested in that I'm going to expand on. Politics being kind of a classic one. And then a really interesting and I think important discussion about, well, are we using that to not talk about subjects that are uncomfortable but vital, and in particular, race? And you got a lot of folks from Black Twitter saying, hey, the race should not be hidden under a content warning because this is the life that I have to live, or the life that I live, and this is what I'm having to endure. And I think it's very important that people see that. The one thing I would say, Kris, I would love your take on this whole this discussion that's happening. I would say that the quality of discussion I'm seeing on this issue is much better on Mastodon than it is anywhere else, which I think is self-telling.
So the way that I'm handling this, let me just start off by saying is, like, personally, in my opinion, and as far as I'm concerned, race should never be behind a content warning. That's just like get that out of the way right away. This is people's lives; they live it every day. And honestly, like, I can't even go outside in the United States of America without seeing the nationalism and the colonialism, and like that's all racism. It's fucking everywhere. I see it every day. Every time I walk out the front door, like, I'm not gonna put that behind a content warning. However, that's me. So the rule that I'm applying to Hackaderm is your server, your rules. And so if people want to go spin up their own server and moderate it however they want, like, that's the point of the Fediverse, right? Like, we will block them as needed. We will suspend those accounts as needed. We will keep them out of here as needed. And I think as far as like my duty as a moderator and as an administrator, I'm not going to get in the business of being the Fediverse police. I do not want to get in the business of like going and nitpicking people's content warning and saying this should or shouldn't be, and like, you know, using emojis to say that we like this or didn't like it. Like, that's not my job. We're all adults here. Like, Hackaderm is for professionals. And like, as far as I'm concerned, and the message I'm going to send and the influence I'm going to lead with is like, put that shit out there, get it front forward, right? If people feel like we're being racist, it's probably because we fucking are, and we should probably be real about it. EOS.
Right on.
Totally. Jeremy, you just, that's how you come to the stage.
Yeah, the bit I have to add there is talking race is great. Don't need content warnings for that. What I do like content warnings for is Twitter will autoplay videos of folks who look like me getting killed. And waking up to that in the morning, or really any time of the day, is super rough. And I'm very much aware of the situation. And so it's not like, oh, hey, this is a thing that happens. And so it's important, I think, not to lump those two things together. There's talking about roughness, and there's like material that's super traumatic.
Right, and legitimate, and so that's interesting. And then where would you kind of counsel people? Because this is again, it's been a hot issue. I think people are discussing. I think it's great that people are discussing this issue. Would you counsel people to look toward when you're talking about imagery or a video, really begin to think about what you are posting and kind of how you're presenting that?
It's tough because there's no right answer, but especially video, especially photos, like, don't dampen folks' lived experience. But graphic violence is usually an easy don't. Different people have different experiences with text, but the more you can hide it. And I understand why it happens on Twitter. It's super inflammatory and it's great for engagement, but it kills my soul.
Yeah,
I have to agree with Jeremy on this one. The same with us. Like, anytime that a war breaks out here, we share the information very publicly so people can know. But obviously, war, and it's not ever good. But if it's any kind of imagery or videos, or even link to images and videos, that also we learned that, like, people think, oh, it's not behind content warning, this link might be saved, and you go to the link, it's an awful YouTube video or a very awful Reddit something. Or we decided that all of this should be behind the content warning, so people don't get traumatized at the 4 in the morning, you know.
Totally. Yeah, that's great. Very good guidance. And again, I think I'm heartened by the fact that, because I don't know if this has been your take too, I think the quality of discussion on this issue has been actually pretty good. And in general, the quality of discussion on Mastodon is way beyond what we're getting at. There is no real discussion on Twitter. I mean, there's very little true discussion on Twitter, and I'm seeing a lot of really good discussion on lots of good issues.
I feel like if I was to summarize it, I would say that my experience with Mastodon is discussion is productive, right? It's intended to like have some outcome, and it's intended to change things, and it's intended to be effective because it can be, right? Like because like if we have a discussion on Mastodon about race or about content warnings, like we can change our policy later that day, right? Like there's a high reward, high outcome return on investment with like these discussions, and that leads to better, more high quality, more effective discussions, right? Like we have skin in the game again. We have equity in our social media again. We can actually have these discussions and roll out a change, and it actually goes and it impacts our experience and the way that we're dealing with it. So like maybe a war does break out and we want to change our rules. Like that's reasonable again. We can do that. And it doesn't involve shit posting, and it doesn't involve like getting millions and millions of likes and retweets and like trying to convince the world that like our cause is somehow more virtuous than another. It just is like it's mom and pop shop style like discussion.
And Kris, how does like a disagreement between different servers get resolved in terms of the content they moderate or don't? Is that how you choose to interact with other servers?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So whenever like I fill out like a moderation, like I want to report someone or whatever, there's like a toggle button that says like send this to the other server. So like if you were on my server and you were like, you know, acting up or responding to somebody on another server and they reported you, there's like they can opt in to like send the report and like basically go tattletale on them back to their own server mods. And then there's 3 different levels of like blocking. There's like straight up like block this domain like at the gateway, like at layer 7. Like if any traffic comes from, you know, this domain, just outright refuse it on our servers. And then there's like silence and suspend, which are like, you know, taking it back a little bit as you come closer. And then there's just like mute, which is just like mute this for your own personal user. So like you see that there are some controls on like how you can manage that. And like as an administrator, we're trying to figure out like the best policies and when to do what for like our community. But yeah, again, like we just like are just putting everything in GitHub, and like it's all an experiment. We're kind of learning as we're going.
And have you used all 3 of those levers?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
By the way, I've been having a problem with that. So I'm on the bsd.network server, and I would like to follow Adam Curry. Now, I don't agree with him, but I would like to follow him, right? And my server admins have decided to block Adam Curry's Mastodon server completely, which put me in a tough spot. Luckily, I do have my own instance in Armenia, so I could follow him from there. But, you know, these are some kind of disagreements that you might have with your own server admin if you're not the admin of your own server. I've also noticed that they also could, and Kris, correct me if I'm wrong, they could also hide it so people would not see unless they specifically follow them using the exact, you know, the username URL. And after that, you can see them, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So there's in for a moment.
Oh yeah.
So I actually wanted to draw back really quick to content warnings, and I want to say I'm biased on this because I'm in a relationship with the person who came up with the concept. But I just wanted to note that person. The reason that they are a thing is because she is a Navy veteran and she is a victim of relationship abuse. And this was a tool for her to be able to use social media without being triggered with her PTSD that she has. And so I think that's an important thing to keep in mind when we're talking about content warnings. That's kind of what the purpose of it was, to prevent people who need to not see types of content from seeing that content.
Well, and I think, and just to Jeremy's point too, or I mean, I think that the kind of the key is like you've got a human being on the other side of this, and it's
exactly.
You're not just about eyeballs and clicks, likes, virality. I mean, another kind of like meta point here, and Kris, I want to get back to what you're saying, but it is harder to go viral on Mastodon at some level. It's harder for, I think, a hot take to go viral. I think that is a great thing. The engagement that I have seen on Mastodon is higher than I've seen in Twitter in a long time. And I mean like real engagement, where people are reading something and commenting on it or adding their own thing. Or, I mean, there's a lot of really good, a lot of very positive engagement, but do not expect a hot take to go viral because it won't. And I think that's actually great. I think it's a good thing.
And then as far as federation goes, yeah, that there can very much be issues along that. There's a lot of instances that defederate with a lot of other instances for a lot of reasons, some of which are very good reasons and some of which are very silly. I mean, it's pretty obvious why you would want to defederate with something like truth.social or Gab, I think. But
that was straightforward.
But there's also a lot of instances that will defederate with other instances. Like, for example, the one I'm on, Nia.social, is a miskey instance and doesn't publish the list of instances we've defederated with. And so because of that, there are other instances who I have friends or I have had friends on that just because they can't see our block lists, they defederate with us automatically. And so there's been drama around that. There's often a lot of meta discussion and it can get very heated. You haven't seen any of the meta discussion that happens on Mastodon yet, and I assure you it gets bad in a way that you can't really get on Twitter. But I still don't think that necessarily is a net negative.
Well,
Yeah.
It's just that there's an entirely new type of drama that can happen because it's a new type of social network.
Okay, I gotta run.
You bet.
Yep, I'll talk to everyone later. And strong +1 on the last comments. And I think I learned a lot about content warning just now and how it's like an accessibility thing that you can like offer as a way for people to like manage it on their end. And it's just like
that's a great way to say it. It's an accessibility tool.
Right, it's a data entry thing, right? Like, and if like we don't like the way that the UI doesn't like deal with the data, then like we change the UI. But like
yeah.
Image descriptions up there. There's just people out there who can't manage it the same way that we can't, like, you know, for one reason or another. And as somebody who's a trauma survivor myself and in a trauma family, strong +1.
Kris, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and Kris, thank you for everything you're doing with hackaderm. It's awesome. It's a huge service, and I think as folks may have seen, but Oxide is proud to be the first company on hackaderm. So that's been a lot of fun. Thank you very much.
For the content warning thing, a few days ago, I talked to someone who said, well, I don't know what to CV because, well, in this case, the person is autistic. And so assume or interpreting what could be triggering is a very hard mental task for them. And no list exists, at least on the instance they were on. And we talked about it and had some interesting discussion. And the thing we got out of this is that the UI could support this, because at the moment, you only can do expand all CVs or collapse all CVs. And there's no real way to filter between CVs you want to auto-expand and those you don't, because there's no standardization. The UI could help by sampling the local or federated timeline and look at the CVs and provide you with an example list. These are the top 10 CVs, and there's a freeform field. So CV topics could organically in the community make themselves for a social standard without the need for process or configuration.
Well, and I think, yeah. Sorry, Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, there's also the thing is right now it's a freeform field, and there's zero structure to it, zero validation. As it said, it's a subject line that was repurposed essentially as a CV. So
I think it's important for it to remain an open-ended field. Just noting that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, I mean, to me, kind of the higher order bit is this is functionality that users of this want, but those of us, if on a commercial site where we are not buying a product, but we famously are the product, they are less incentivized to give us these kinds of tools. So I think that there's a lot of reason for optimism. This is going to be an issue that I think there's going to be a lot of discussion on, and as you point out, there's lots of room for improvement.
One of the things I want to say, one of the things I do want to say is that I am also autistic, and so are most of the people in my friend group, and we tend not to have a lot of issues with this. But the thing is, what we've done is we've developed sort of this social understanding that if someone you follow or Well, if you see content that you think should be content warned, and you know the person who like posted it, you could just message them and say, hey, in the future, can you content warn this? And there's no judgment, nothing like that between us. And that's kind of how it's worked. But if you don't already have that social network in, you know, on Mastodon where you have that kind of convention going, I do understand how that can be confusing.
Well, and I do think, and Adam, you famously gave me a book for my birthday. So you've been publicly shamed. It's like I think you might know a thing or two about this. And actually, really, really good book. And I do think that the Mastodon is less incentivized towards public shaming, which I think is, I think has got a lot of positives associated with it. There's a lot of things that like we have. And it just linear to your earlier point of like, this is something you can message someone privately and say, hey, by the way, like you may want to rethink this next time, and you actually affect some change.
Well, it's not like there isn't public shaming.
No, I know that. No, I know we definitely have not eliminated humanity here. But I want to get Marin in Tim in. You've had your hand up a bunch. I want you to get you in here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
I just wanted first to name drop a few projects. First is a PVA Pinafore. It's a Mastodon client. It's PWA, developed by great frontenders, and it's awesome. And Lemmy is actually written in Rust. And this leads to my next point, that unfortunately ActivityPub is, in my view, suffering from the same problem as Jabber, where there is basic protocol, but there is no guarantee that you will have all the features.
Right.
So, for example, and actually it goes a long way back. There was a split between ActivityPub folks and IndieWeb folks. The second bunch focused more on UX, and the first one focused more on protocols.
Yeah,
so far it wasn't great on either side, and I think it would be very, interesting to see whether the new interest in ActivityPub would actually fill it with more features, because in IndieWeb, folks are kind of in their own homes. Each one is developing their feature, and ActivityPub is, in my view, suffering from a little bit of design by committee.
Interesting. Well, and that's a peril of having more people interested in a thing is not always better. I mean, people in open source communities, we always think large communities are better than small communities, but having been in both very large communities and very small communities have some things to be said for themselves because it is much easier to get consensus than you don't have a bunch of new interests coming in.
On the other hand, there is the interesting interoperability that this allows where, for example, I can post a video of something on PeerTube, and then on my Mastodon or Miski instance, I can boost that so other people will see it, and people can reply back, and it will show up as a comment on the video. And I think that's just really interesting how it also enables things like that.
That is really cool. And anything that would make YouTube comments not an absolute hellhole would be very much welcome. Jeremy, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to add, I've received one more unexpected benefit from federated instances and the decentralization making my name less valuable. I am Penguin on Hackaderm, but on Twitter, there can only be one AHL. There can only be one Penguin. And so if you are late, no vanity for you, first name, bunch of numbers. Which seems fine, except for myself, the downside has been I'm a persistent target for spam and for hacks and for death threats because it's asymmetric when a Twitch user or professional video gamer is like, but that's a thing that I call myself, and I'm a 14-year-old who doesn't know about and so swatting is cool.
Okay, so I thought it's people who are like want to challenge you for the name. I thought it was people who are coming after you because they're associating you with other penguins. Like, look, I hate penguins. I finally found the penguin here. But this is actually like people who are like, no, I'm the penguin. You're not the penguin.
I actually dropped a previous username because of someone doing this and essentially later trying to impersonate me.
Oh yeah, okay, that's so interesting. So this actually, Jeremy, because I've had this question about. And I know Adam because his plan of having the American Hockey League's Mastodon. so there can be multiple. Every instance can have its own. The IDs are not unified across instances. Is that right?
Much the same way as email, right? Your name at instance, and so there can be a penguin at Mastodon Social, a penguin at Octodon, a penguin at Masto. But all the other instances can have a duplicate of your name. Much like going to a startup early, it's cool to get Jeremy at the place. But when you go to a 100,000 person organization, there's a great chance that they've hired another Jeremy who was born between 1976 and 1983 at the popular name then. And so you don't get it much like if you're inside the same company or inside the same instance. But thousands of instances, thousands of people with your exact name.
All right. So Adam's plan of putting the American Hockey League in a box is going to require Adam. You're going to have to go to every instance you can think of to create AHL to prevent them.
This is actually delightful because now they can have their own AHL at hockey.social or whatever. And no one will need to tell me about the latest Checkers controversy or the Calder Cup outcome or anything like that.
So I'm realizing where this all started too. Do you know why I'm Penguin?
No.
It's because Jeremy was taken. Do you know by who?
Oh, I do know. But yes, I know Jeremy. Absolutely. I know. Yeah, that is funny. Jeremy screwed you.
Right.
Oh.
User number 12, maybe.
User number 12. I loved. Have you met Jeremy?
Yeah, no, we've been out in Berkeley. Yeah,
Jeremy is great, and so there's so much I love about Jeremy. Jeremy was just like, because I was dealing with Jeremy in 2007 when Twitter was a tire fire and the fail whale, and he was just like, "Help me, get me out of here!" Like I am, and he did say, I remember he said like, "The first opportunity I get to sell everything and leave, I'm doing." And I'm like, okay, well, let's debunk your problem right now. I mean, it was just like, and sure enough, that's basically what he did. And like, good on him. I thought it's.
He was like slipping you a note, like palming you a note, like, help me, get me out of here.
Right. Like, why does it say do not read? Oh, do not read aloud. Oh, I'm so sorry. Right. Exactly. I really like Jeremy. So Jeremy, I'm very sorry that because I would love to join you in obviously disparaging original Jeremy, but original Jeremy is first Jeremy. What do we call him? I'm not sure. Sorry.
Jeremy Prime, just Jeremy on Twitter.
No, there's no real Jeremy. Yeah, did you go were you gonna? And I guess that you probably predate like the real Jeremy, or you could have taken all these other. Well, you can. That's interesting. So then that was the birth of Penguin. And then are you, Jeremy, on Mastodon? Are you sticking with Penguin? Are you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say day zero, but on hackaderm was like April, whatever it is, 24th or something, 25th, so whatever the second day was. And so on that particular instance, yes. On another particular instance, I joined 2017 or 2018, yes. But I'm not going to try and do the name rush of however many tens of thousands of instances are. That feels like a path to madness.
Right. I'm not going to say day zero because I prefer to phrase it as hour 14. That's awesome. And Jeremy, have you been using? So you're early on hackaderm, and have you switched your engagement now over primarily to Mastodon?
No, and I had joined hackaderm, but not started posting. Twitter was. It was something to explore. Still on Twitter, on Mastodon, a lot more in read mode. A lot of it's still, you're floating in the water in the wreckage, and you're trying to find your people now. There's not the discovery mechanism, but I just mentioned why not having the discovery mechanism is really nice, because that means that the bad folks don't find me as quickly. And so, but yeah, I've got a foot in both worlds right now.
Did you see Paul Ford's? I can't bring myself to say toot, but it was a toot. As the Paul Ford's published Mastodon post, that he describes this condition that you're in as purgatory, where you are in between the bird site and Mastodon, and kind of feet in both domains. One thing I did want to mention that I don't think we've hit on yet, but Adam, I am loving the 500 character limit.
Oh yeah, no, that's great. But okay, this is a dumb one, but I see other toots that seem to go well past that.
Yes, it is server specific.
Yeah.
Yes, it's server. So for example, when I post from my WordPress, using the ActivityPub plugin, I told it to publish the whole post. And for example, my Armenian server does have character limit, it's just a default configuration. And for example, BSD.network has like 5,000 character limit, I think. So it is server specific. The protocol does not define a limitation.
Okay, so
it is considered good etiquette for long posts to be CW just for being long.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I think most server software has like a limit of what they will accept at like 8,000 characters or so, but you can just bump it if you have your own server to whatever.
That's interesting. Well, I'm on Mastodon.social, which I think was one of the early instances. I seem to have created it when they first announced it, which has a 500 character limit, which I found to be just that different. There's a big difference, as it turns out, between 280 and 500. And because the tweet thread is the other thing, Adam, that is a feature. Have you done tweet storms? Have you?
Yeah, well, I know that you read them, but every week for this show, when I announce the videos, I do. I don't, and I got to say, I was not clear on how much I was violating etiquette rules on Mastodon as I toot stormed, some of the content from these videos.
Okay, so you're just using you're past toot. Toot is fine.
I'm not really. When you hear me say it, there are quotation marks around it. Okay.
But I also heard you say toot storm, but you just seem to just go. I mean, you didn't seem to slow the car down on that.
Oh, I vomited in my mouth when I did that. Yeah, that's what happened. Yeah.
So I'm going to have to replay the recording, see if I can hear that moment. I'm not sure that I heard it.
I'm on Messkey, so it's called a note.
I know. Well, and I did know that Mastodon.social does say publish instead of toot as the verb. Stephen O'Grady had a blog post that you linked to, Adam, that I thought was really good. And I know you had a couple of questions on there. I feel we've hit a lot of them today, but were the questions on there that you saw that we have not actually?
Well, one of those things that he brought up that we haven't really talked about is the money.
Yes.
Like how does this become sustainable? I do love this zeitgeist of folks saying like $8 a month, forget about it. But for example, I'm paying $10 a month on Patreon for Mastodon.social. But I think how this all becomes sustainably financed is an interesting topic.
Can I answer that?
Please.
One anecdote I can share maybe is that in around 2018, 2019, myfreecamps.com secretly sponsored basically the entire Pleroma development team. It was like 6 people, I think, at that time. And they basically paid them to develop Pleroma for some reasons.
Yeah, and I think that, economically, this is going to be decentralized, so it's going to look different. And I think that if you, to Kris's earlier point about knowing, kind of having this human-to-human contact, I think, Adam, I think people are more likely to do the Patreon, the $10 a month Patreon. I think the $8 per month for Twitter Blue, I think that may be a point of principle. This may be surprising to learn.
No, that's fair enough. And actually, this is an embarrassing reveal now, but this is a safe space. Like I was paying the $3 a month for the old Twitter Blue or whatever, in part because I felt like I took a lot from the site, and sure, like I wanted the thing to exist. Now, obviously, I have fairly complicated feelings about that. But I think it's born of the same motivation that gives $10 a month to the Patreon site.
And I don't think it's going to be. It would be interesting to see how expensive it is to run. Because I think that when you don't have a company behind it, you also don't have a lot of costs associated with it. I mean, people are a lot of the costs of Twitter. It's not just infrastructure.
Yes. That's what I was going to say. So one of the reasons why our Armenian instances have been sustainable was 2 things. One of them is we have a lot of volunteers in different aspects, not just moderators on the web interface to help us with the reporting and banning and stuff like that. A lot of times for example, when we teach children programming and systems in Unix, we tell them, can you get on the system and let's say upgrade a package on this FreeBSD or install the latest version implementation of Docker because of some reason. So that's one thing that has helped us to become sustainable, giving the users of the system that we trust more access. So we, the founders, quote unquote, of the instance, we have also other lives to do. And the second thing is that we realized is actually company sponsorship, which has been very weirdly working. So one of the instances here is done by my friend. So he runs his server physically in our company's data center. My other friend who runs it in the other side of the country, he asked his own company that, can you give me, let's say, $20 a month, so I will put my server of Mastodon, and on the about page I will say, happily sponsored by this software development company that no one has ever heard of, has like 2 customers, that is outsourcing. And they're like, yeah, sure, it's nothing, it's just a small amount of money for electricity and hard drives. And one of their sysadmins is helping that instance, quote unquote, founder to replace the disk once in a while and stuff like that. So it's been more like a human interaction that it's been people who be keeping it sustainable, not even our own users, but the people that we know on the instance. The human connection has made it very, very, very sustainable for us.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think there's really something to that. I mean, when we were, looking for a spot for Oxide, because obviously I think that the social has been very important for Oxide, and we love our community here. But knowing that it really is not going to continue on Twitter Spaces or Twitter, Kris and I had a conversation, and like, all right, what do we want this to look like? And I'm excited to support Hackaderm however we can. That it's going to be in some monetary support, and ideally, I think that we want to live the dream of getting Hackaderm running on an Oxide rack.
Yes, please. Yes,
yeah,
please.
Right. I think that there are some, and maybe even from Kris, I know she had to split that Oxide rack it's definitely not a home lab kind of a rack, unless you've got 15 kW in your basement.
Right. This is why I was asking about some of the gear that was running it after I saw Kris's tweet about running it on Oxide gear, which I'm all for. It's just, the Oxide rack is kind of a big boy.
It's chunky, but we've got...
it would be massively overkill.
It would be massively overkill, but it would also be, I think, it would be a lot of fun for us to,
for sure.
And it would be a good use case for us, and then also a great way to give back. Because honestly, and Adam, you and I have said over and over again, we would gladly buy Twitter Spaces as a product. This is valuable to us, to Oxide. We would absolutely pay for it. There's no way to do that right now in Twitter. That is the product I would pay for. And I think that there are social engagement has value to companies that is not advertising. And I think that we've lived in this kind of very narrow idea that the only value of social networking is advertising, and that's not the only value. And we can actually get to value that's much more organic, I think. And then I think companies going to be willing to contribute to. So, and trying to just your point about, like, it doesn't surprise me that a company is willing to help.
There may be kind of a generational shift on this as well, where I feel like, and Brian, I don't know if I speak for our generation, but there was kind of anathema to paying for things that feel like they should be free, that led to ad sponsorship. Whereas I feel like younger generations have much more familiarity with, rather than buying their music, they're very happy to pay for Spotify in a way that I was reluctant to. And maybe this is another part of that shift where folks are happy to pay, the $5, $10, $20 a month for access for these social sites, whereas, our generation maybe balked at it.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that there are definitely different models. We can get commercial viability without necessarily the Twitter model. The Twitter model is not the only model to commercial viability, and indeed, it might not even be a model to commercial viability.
Right, which is right. Is it indeed a model? Right, and then same thing with Facebook, right? Like as we see, it's faltering.
Oh, I just wanted to add that I personally should thank the Americans in the chat here, because our next server is sponsored by USAID.
Oh, wow.
Wow, that's really interesting. That's awesome.
Our next servers are sponsored with via USAID. They agreed to give us a lot of desktops for the children to study, as well as a desktop that should have server-like specs. Let's put it that way, so we can host our stuff on there as well, both the internal Git stuff as well as external Mastodon stuff. So I know I can't believe I just forgot about it. I was literally in their office today talking about delivering these servers to the town that does have a Mastodon instance of its own.
That is
from U.S. taxpayers' money. Thank you very much, all.
That is great. Well, and I feel that like with these organizations like USAID, you've got people who are so, and hopefully you found this to be the case in Armenia, but people, civil servants who are very well-meaning on the ground, who often have to deal with a lot of bureaucratic entities. So I'm glad there's some positivity coming out of that. That is really great. And exciting to hear. So I want to. We do need to wrap, but I did want to hit two other points that Adam, would love your take on. One is I kind of like the impaired searchability of Mastodon.
What do you like about it?
So what I like about it is that it does not lend itself well to I want to go be mad. I want to go find someone who is saying something that I disagree with, and I want to be mad about it.
Totally fair, and guilty as charged in terms of using Twitter search for that mechanism. Yeah, totally agreed.
And I think it's important to know that people on Fediverse have responded harshly to even attempts at providing search.
Well, and I kind of get it. At first, I'm like, oh, that seems ridiculous, and I'm like, you know what, that makes sense. Actually, make it a little harder for people to seek out being enraged. And I say that actually because I need to impair myself, because it's like this is like I'm having that intervention with myself, right? And then the other thing, because I know you and I both like these kind of coteries of specialists that have found their way on the Twitter. I find it super interesting, right? You got like weather, Twitter, whatever. And I know they've been really concerned about those coteries moving, but I find that they're moving pretty quick. As it turns out, like if you're if you do, if you're a meteorologist or you're a neuroscientist or you're an epidemiologist, you can actually figure out Mastodon. It's actually not that hard to figure out. Those coteries seem to be moving. Is that your experience? Do you have any particular coteries that you like?
So, I mean, I guess the ones that I have been most interested in particular, in like the last, say, 6 days, has been election and politics related ones, and I haven't found that to have moved yet. I found a bunch of folks that I like have kind of not have been eager for Mastodon, but sort of blocked at the gates from some of these, as we discussed, low ramification, low consequence decisions, but a little bit stymied. So I don't know. I think some of the communities that I have been following recently have not necessarily made the jump yet.
I have. I'm sorry. I'm talking a lot today. So the two things that we also have done, and I think a lot of people will not like us about this. For example, the blogs that were like Brian, your blog being one of them, and Adam too, is because your blog doesn't support ActivityPub, we have an RSS to ActivityPub publisher. So whenever you write a new blog, it takes the content and publishes it to ActivityPub. That's one of the things that we did. And the second thing is we've done a survey, I think last year, 80+% of our users were not in tech. Like they were not developers, sysadmins, nothing like that. I don't know how did that happen. Some of them were teachers in rural areas. Some of them were students, and the only thing that we saw in common is that they were nerds, as in like they had something that they wanted to talk about. One of them just wanted to toot about their experience in another city. Like they just wanted a safe space about that instead of being a mainstream media. So I don't think it's complicated for your communities, Adam, to bring to Mastodon. They just need like a guide, an FAQ maybe,
That's right. Someone to hold their hand along the way. I think that's right.
Exactly.
Or some protracted Twitter downtime, which surely is
that'll be a strong motivator for sure.
Exactly. All right, Moritz, I know you got your hand up. I think it's going to be the last point. We want to wrap here, but I know you've had your hand up for a long time.
Thanks. A few days ago, with the last big influx of Twitter users, our local instance had to scale up. So they already closed registrations, but because the Fediverse got bigger and there was more traffic, they had to buy a bigger server. So for the sustainability and financing aspect we already touched on, I think the efficiency of the protocol and implementations is very important because it can keep costs down or make them explode. The question is, has anyone looked yet really at the limits of efficiency in the activity pub protocol? We had some very preliminary discussions locally, but nothing really technical with figures and stuff like that.
Well, and I think that we can definitely count on lots of folks looking at those kinds of things in the days and weeks to come. I do want to wrap because we've got to split. But thank you very much, Adam. I think our next is this going to be our last space, or are we going to? What do you think is our?
Let's set that as the goal. We got a lot of work to do this week to make that true, but the goal is a week from today we're on a different platform, and the fallback is we'll be back here.
Well, and actually, I can't. A week from today, we're traveling for Thanksgiving, so I'm actually
even
out.
better.
Right.
Turns out you and me both. I just forgot. So we got 2 weeks. Perfect. You can get almost anything done in 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks, that's plenty of time. So we don't even have to think about it for no. But so suggestions very much welcome. Again, we love the ability for people to be able to get up on stage and hear from people we haven't heard from before. So thank you so much, everybody. And we will see you on Mastodon. Thanks, everyone.